Welcome to The Real News. I'm Kim Brown. The COVID-19 pandemic is undoubtedly posing a very serious public health crisis to the globe, but also a global economic crisis as well. A new policy brief by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, or ESCWA, focuses on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Arab region of the Middle East, where many countries depend heavily on oil revenue and also have a highly stratified economic system with little or no social safety net. Now, the policy brief predicts a loss of about 40% GDP as a result of the pandemic and a loss of, at the very least, 1.7 million jobs. In other words, an economic disaster plunging millions into poverty. Iman Tomei has a flower shop in Beirut, Lebanon, and she was given a special dispensation to open her store for Mother's Day. Let's have a listen from her.
There is no comparison between Mother's Day this year and last year. Most people aren't going out because of coronavirus fears, even though we have taken precautions. We have sanitized the shop and are offering delivery services. We put out ads so people won't need to come down here, that we will start delivering and that we will disinfect the flowers. But despite it all, people are afraid of any contact.
Today, we are joined with Niranjan Sarangi. He is a macroeconomic and fiscal policy expert at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA, and he joins us today from Lebanon. Niranjan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It is my pleasure.
So if you could please tell us what makes the Arab region specifically vulnerable to the economic consequences of the measures to prevent the pandemic that are happening right now?
Yes, it's a very, very important issue for the region because the whole Arab region has been facing crisis for a long time. I mean, in terms of growth, almost the last decade, it's a decade of loss. In our previous publication on fiscal policy review, we have shown how the region has faced a decade of losses in terms of growth due to several reasons. Conflicts in some parts of the country, the oil prices fluctuations, plus several other protests and challenges that several countries have faced. So altogether, it has been facing that kind of crisis due to both internal and external challenges. And on top of it, this health crisis, which is the global pandemic, fall on it. And it is at a time when, so the challenges compounded for the region, particularly because many countries in the region are also at a high debt stress. They are under fiscal pressure. Debt to GDP is very high in several countries. They are already feeling the pressure of debt servicing. Growth is, as I mentioned, that it is stagnating or going down. And there are demands, the aspirations of people that has to be met. So when governments are already under pressure, the global pandemic is causing more compounding pressure on them. And some of the countries really are very much vulnerable how to address this challenge, both financially and technically. So it's as it is unfolding, we are at ESCWA trying to estimate what has been its impact in the past few days and months as a preliminary estimate. And we found that the region's estimate has gone down. If we assume that by the same rate as the global growth is going down, then the region has lost almost $42 billion of GDP. And number two, we counted its impact on employment, unemployment, I would say. The region is losing something like 1.7 million jobs. It's a 1.2 percentage point increase in unemployment rate.
The ESCWA policy brief talks about the Arab region as a whole, but I was wondering if you could be a little bit more country specific as to where this economic impact is being more strongly felt. For example, Egypt has a population of 100 million. It's already been plagued with overcrowded schools and issues with food insecurity. However, on the other hand, some of the Gulf states are among the richest in the world, and they absolutely have ample resources to deal with the crisis, but they are more heavily dependent on oil revenues. So where are we going to see this loss of jobs and loss of GDP? What countries will this be concentrated in?
Okay, that's a very important question. Actually, we did the estimate for the whole region, and the region constitutes like 22 countries. And it's very diverse, as you mentioned. One part is oil-rich, oil resources dependent. One part is middle-income countries, and there are significant number of countries also who are least developed countries. So the crisis is going to impact differently to different countries. We did not do any specific country-specific estimates at this point because of lack of evidence from the country level. But the pandemic is it's going to impact more in middle-income countries, for example, the jobs, because the service sector is heavily impacted in this global pandemic because of social distancing, particularly. So the countries that are more dependent on service sector are going to be hard hit. The countries that are depending on informal sector more, particularly in middle-income and low-income countries of the region, where the informal sector is high, they are going to be more affected. The jobs are going to be more affected there. And similarly, these countries are also depending on remittances. And if the Gulf is not doing well, if the oil prices is going down, then remittances flow is also going to go down. So obviously, the challenge compounds, as I mentioned. On the other hand, in the oil-rich countries, the Gulf countries, where the economic activities are dependent on oil revenues more or less, as one has seen, the oil prices have gone down systematically since the outbreak of the pandemic. And in recent month, in recent days, in March particularly, it is compounded the market pressure, and that led to further price competition and market share competition, and that has led to collapse of the oil prices. So obviously, the means to satisfy the consumption at the expenditure level is difficult for the oil-rich countries. So obviously, they have a buffer, but they are also facing systematically shocks since 2014. So the pool of resources that they can rely on is shrinking. So it's not a very optimistic situation where we can say that yes, they have much more resources and they can handle it without facing the heat of it.
At the end of the policy brief, you offer 6 recommendations so that countries can help mitigate the economic impacts related to the COVID-19 pandemic. In your opinion, which of those recommendations are most important? And also, if you could give an example, is there a country already in the Arab region that is adhering to some of these recommendations and that you would like to single out as doing a good job relative to the circumstances?
Oh yes, the recommendations are as it is explained. It requires both national and regionally coordinated actions. At the national level, there are several examples, particularly coming from the Gulf, the oil-rich countries. They have announced stimulus packages to support the economic activities. Egypt also announced stimulus packages to support the economic activities and to fight against this COVID-19 pandemic. There are other measures than the fiscal stimulus packages that countries are using. For example, lockdown, social distancing, work from home, schools and universities are shut down. So there are several other measures are taken into account to fight the impact of the pandemic. Because once it goes to the outbreak stage, the region may face a really catastrophic situation. So in terms of stimulus packages, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman have, declared several stimulus packages to support the businesses, and so that's the more kind of concrete examples we have. Otherwise, there is a call for coordinated action, and regional support as well as international support is required to take into account the challenge, the scale of the challenge. Except the Gulf and Egypt, other measures in the region are more sort of locking down or non-financial measures, and that's not going to help much in terms of jobs or social protection. Social protection is, as it is, low in the region. And extending social protection, bringing those who lost their jobs into the social protection bracket is very, very difficult. So on the one hand, the fiscal pressure is high. The finances needed to support those new poor or new vulnerable people who lost their jobs is high. And on the other hand, the resource base for most of the countries is low. Tax to GDP ratio is much low. So there is a requirement for both extending the social protection and raising the finances. The national actions will not be sufficient to address the challenge of the problem that they are facing, the scale of the problem that they are facing. It would require a combination of national and regionally coordinated actions. It would also require support of the private sector. At the national level, raising domestic resources is essential, and there is the opportunity in the sense that the region has also wealthy businesses, and they account for a lot of the wealth in the region. So there is opportunity to see how, in terms of solidarity with those who are vulnerable, how finances can be raised from them in terms of taxing the high net worth people, or support of the businesses, and regionally coordinated action. So all measures need to be taken into account to fight against.
Rajan, I know that you're an economist, not a health official. However, you are a person, you are an observer from your corner of the world, and you are coming to us today from Lebanon. Can you tell us, from your observations, what are you seeing, how the pandemic is impacting where you live?
Yes, it's impacting heavily to Lebanon, particularly heavily to Lebanon, because Lebanon has been facing a debt crisis for a long time, and Lebanon has been facing economic crisis since last 3 months or so. People were kind of protesting for better public service, protesting against the raise of taxes and all sorts of things. And they were losing their incomes, they were losing their jobs. On top of that, the COVID-19 arrived, and that led to lockdown. We are in a lockdown situation since last 8 days. The airport is shut, the seaport is shut, so and they have a crisis of dollar as it is, which makes trade difficult because Lebanon depends a lot on imports. So it just compounds the effect. I can see that several businesses are shut, and those who were operating like 3 months ago, several, and the streets are empty. So financial crisis, the debt crisis, the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis is just one on the top of another for Lebanon.
Okay, well, we're going to leave the conversation there. We've been speaking with Narajan Sharangi. He is the macroeconomic and fiscal policy expert at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. He's been joining us today from Lebanon. Narajan, we appreciate your time and your expertise today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It is my pleasure.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.